Well, the way that we see common ground is I think a place where architecture gets discussed through individuals, but then also shared. With the project that we're working on for Canada that's called Migrating Landscapes, we've invited basically through an open call young Canadian architects to present their own ideas about migration and practicing globally through a specific cultural lens, and then sharing that story and producing architecture in the common terrain. And this particular theme was developed before the Common Ground theme came out, and we think it's really important to really try to discover what one has to say about themselves and their own position until you can really participate in the common. But it is important, and I think practice is moving towards very global trends as we're talking about, but also it's so complicated to know everything these days that collaborations and sharing work cross-disciplinary in a cross-disciplinary way is very important, and one person can't possibly know everything, so we do need to share ideas.
I think I wouldn't mind adding that one of the things that we've sort of stumbled upon or discovered thinking about our project, and I think it feeds fairly well into the idea of common ground, is the idea that the ground on which we as architects operate is messy. It's actually quite messy, and then there's no easy way to orient oneself, and I think our project actually gets into investigation of how do you position yourself within that new landscape, if you wish. We call it a landscape. David Chipperfield calls it a common ground, but we find it not to be sort of a condition to which is easy to respond. We have to prod and dig quite deep in order to respond to it.
I think one thing that resonates with what's said already is the idea of dialogue. And if you think about landscape that is out there for individual architects and individuals to start dialoguing, I think that's what's important about this project, and that resonates with the Common Ground theme. And through dialogue, you can construct a new kind of edifice that might not come from an individuality. So I think the dialogue as a mechanism and landscape as a provision for dialogue is something that resonates with our project and resonates with the theme of Common Ground.
The concept of migrating landscapes is really about sharing your personal story and then producing architecture through that personal story. We're very interested in teasing out that particular condition from our authors who have produced work for migrating landscapes, and we are asking, or had asked them to tell their cultural narrative through a 3-minute video, and then actually producing a piece of architecture, an architectural model that's their first settlement into a new context. And we are asking them to do so also on what we call the migrating landscapes, which is really an abstraction of a cultural and social condition in Canada. We think that condition is something that you're not asked to assimilate to, but you really get to have your own voice in. And this is very particular, we think, to the Canadian condition, where again it's free and you're embraced for your differences, and we wanted to find out what people really have to say in their innards, not in terms of what is the architectural trend out there or what's on the pages of a glossy sort of architectural magazine, but really what they have within themselves to speak of.
I think Migrating Landscape, one of the important things that it stands for is the idea of, I think it's resonating with what Johannes has said, the idea of differentiated identity and celebrating that. And by celebrating those differentiated identity, you actually develop a much stronger collective than the other way around, where you try to assimilate or conform to certain standards or certain established standards or fashion. I think collectivity built up by individual differentiated identity is much stronger than conformed identities that builds a kind of superficial, perhaps, or less stronger collectivity. So what this project is standing for is that kind of push, perhaps a kind of refreshing idea of that, perhaps a new starting point for Canada, where we can and we have been celebrating those differentiated identity. Perhaps we can use that as a starting point of a new kind of architecture, next generation architecture for Canada, and perhaps through the world. That's the message that this project is trying to carry out.
One of the things we've discovered early on the project is that we could almost use Canada as a testing ground for the world, because we, as a largely immigrant country, are accepting the influences from all around the world through through people that move to the country and to Canada. And today the condition of contemporary practice is such that you are practicing across the borders in contexts that are unfamiliar and new to you. So what we try to, again, tease out, to use the same word as you did, is to try to tease out that personal reflection or something that you carry within you that you cannot separate yourself from when you're practicing somewhere in this condition. It would be the migrating landscape that you're practicing in, and how does that inform what you're doing?
Well, we had a couple of objectives with the project. One of them, a very important one, was to try to promote architecture to Canada and try to promote the event of the Architecture Biennale in Canada. It's really not part of our common understanding and common knowledge, and we really wanted to tour the project and really promote that value of architecture to the country before. So in terms of the mechanism of the project, we've launched the competition about a year and a half ago, and it was an open competition for architects 45 and under. And then the results of that competition were exhibited in 7 cities across the country, from coast to coast, Halifax to Vancouver. And then we invited juries in each of those cities to select regional winners. And those juries consisted of some of the more established and well-known Canadian architects. And then the regional winners moved on to a national stage where one more jury selected the final winners to come and exhibit with us at the Biennale. And so there are 18 final winners. The other objective, of course, was to try to give an opportunity to those young practices to be able to exhibit their work regionally, nationally, and internationally. And in terms of the actual infrastructure and armature for the exhibition, we as a curatorial team designed the system for the migrating landscapes, which is a wooden modular system in which the entrants themselves were able to affect the plot of land that they settled their architectural model in. And again, this is a very important idea to us, where we're not asking them to assimilate to this landscape, but we are allowing them to modify it.
So that was one of the hopes that we were trying to create. One of the challenges of the shows, where there's quite a number of contributors, is how do you create a show that is coherent. And I think the migrating landscape actually does exactly that, ties us back to the common ground and provides a place upon which all the contestants settle, and then people can actually identify with that and identify with the exhibition as they move through it.